We looked at how we could take our standard form of our equation, the ax squared plus bx plus c, and if we completed the square on this without numbers, just with our letters a, b, and c, how, when we solved, we would end up with this right here. We also looked at it as our x-intercepts. Remember, we have our x-intercepts. We were talking about how the h is the axis of symmetry, and then the distance from the axis of symmetry to the x-intercepts is the d. So then we looked at how we could write this into an equation, and then we had different values that we had used from this part that we had solved for our h and d, and got this same equation for our x-intercepts. Now, the good news is that you don't have to derive this equation every time that you're going to use it. So you're not going to have to redo what we did last week to find this equation. All you need to do is remember this equation. You can remember the equation using a song, right? You can use Pop Goes the Weasel, so you do x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, remember, your a has to go with the x squared, the b has to go with the x, and then the c is the constant, or the thing that's by itself. Okay? The other thing that you need to remember is, or know, is that it has to be set equal to 0 in order for you to use your quadratic formula. Okay? So now, instead of having to complete the square, in order to find the answer, we can just use the quadratic formula. Okay? This is the quadratic formula. So the other day last week, we derived the formula, right? We don't have to derive it anymore, we just need to be able to use it. So the first thing that you need to be able to do is identify your a, b, and c. Well, your a is with the squared, so that means the 6 is a. Your b is with the, just to the first power, so in this case, this is our b, and then our c is the constant, or the thing by itself. Okay? Now, when you find a, b, and c, you take the signs with it. Okay? So now we have x equals negative b, but b is negative 4, so that's a negative 4, plus or minus the square root of b squared. B is negative 4 squared. Make sure you're putting parentheses when you have your negatives, minus 4 times a, which is 6, times c, which is negative 112, all over 2 times a, which is 6. Okay? So that's how we plug it in. So now we just have to know how to solve it. So the first thing that I do is I like to simplify underneath the root. So I put that part that's underneath the root in my calculator. So I don't put the square root in the calculator. I'm just putting the part that's underneath. So negative 4 squared minus 4 times 6 times negative 112. Okay. So that gives us 2704. Okay. So then I'm going to go little step by little step. So negative 4 is a positive 4, plus or minus the square root of 27 over all over 2 times 6, which is 12. Okay. Well, on 2704, I'm going to check to see if it's a perfect square. So I'm going to do the square root of 2704, which in this case it is. It gives us 52. So now we have 4 plus or minus 52 all over 12. If it had not been a perfect square, I would need to break it down. We'll do an example of that in a minute. Now remember, this is representing two answers. This is really representing 4 plus 52 divided by 12 and 4 minus 52 divided by 12. So if we do 4 plus 52, that gives us 56 over 12, right? And if we check to see if 12 goes into it evenly, it doesn't. If you have a TI calculator, you can hit math frac. So you divide the two of them and then hit math frac, and it will simplify it to a fraction, so you'll get 14 thirds. If not, hopefully you can see that 4 goes into both of those, or you can start with 2 and then reduce it. So then you would divide each one by 4, right? If we do 4 minus 52, make sure that you get your correct sign. So this will be negative 48 over 12. And negative 48 over 12 reduces, 12 goes into 48 4 times. And it's still negative. So then these are our two answers for, in this case it's b, because our variable was b. Now, sometimes it's not set equal to 0, so you have to set it equal to 0 first before you do anything. So, for example, if we have this problem, 6x squared minus 3 equals 3x squared. Okay. So you first need to set it equal to 0. So that means I want to move everything to one side. Now I can move everything to the left side or I can move everything to the right side. On this particular problem, it's faster to move the 3x squared to the left side because there's only one term to move. You can do the other way, both are acceptable. So here, when I subtract 6x squared and 3x squared, because those are like terms, I get 3x squared minus 3 equals 0. Now, remember we've got ax squared plus bx plus c. So in this case, there's no x value, so that's really 3x squared plus 0x plus c. Oh, the c is the negative 3. Okay. So that means that a is the 3, b is the 0, and c is the negative 3. So then we do x equals negative b, so negative 0 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so b is 0, 0 squared, minus 4ac, so a is 3, c is negative 3, all over 2a, a is 3. So again, I like to put the part that's underneath the root in the calculator or just figure it out with my brain. Either one is acceptable. So since we did the calculator last time, we'll do our brains this time. So 0, and then I do 4 times 3, which is 12, times negative 3, which is negative 36, but then there's a minus here, so then it's really a plus. Or I like to do my numbers and then figure out the sign. So negative times positive times negative is a positive. 4 times 3 is 12, 12 times 3 is 36, so plus 36, which just gives us 36. So now we have negative 0. Remember, you don't have positive or negative signs with 0, it just exists. So we have 0 plus or minus the square root of 36 all over 2 times 3, which gives us 6. So now, if I take the square root of 36, hopefully you're seeing that 6 and 6, so we have a pair of 6 that can come out. So we have 0 plus or minus 6, nothing's left under the root, all over 6. Remember, this really represents two different answers. You could have 0 plus 6 over 6 and 0 minus 6 over 6. So 0 plus 6 is 6 over 6, and 0 minus 6 is negative 6 over 6, so we get 1 and negative 1 as our answers for x. Now, I also could have gone from this point, well, 0 plus or minus anything is just the number, so I could have done plus or minus 6 over 6, and then reduced these numbers here. So then I would get plus or minus 1, and then notice that would be the same thing that we got here. Right? So you could write this answer as 1 and negative 1, or you could do plus or minus 1. Both of those are acceptable ways to look at it. Okay? Now, if I look at this question, so we've got negative 8x squared plus 12x plus 18 equals 0. Okay. So again, our a, b, and c are based off of ax squared plus bx plus c. So our a is negative 8, our b is 12, and our c is 18. Now typically they're in descending order, so it looks like ax squared plus bx plus c. But the important thing to remember is that the a goes with the x squared, the b goes with the x, and the c is by itself. Okay. It's set equal to 0, so we can just identify our a, b, and c like that. So then we have our formula x equals negative b, so our b is 12, so negative 12 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so b is 12, so 12 squared, minus 4ac, so a is negative 8, c is 18, all over 2a, so 8, negative 8 is a. Okay. So Again, I'm going to do the part that's just underneath the root. So I'm going to do 12 squared minus 4 times negative 8 times 18, which gives us 720. So then I have negative 12 plus or minus the square root of 720 all over 2 times negative 8 is negative 16. Okay. Well, I'm going to take the square root of 720 and see if it's a perfect square. It is not, so that means I've got to do a little bit of work now. So I'm going to break it down sideways so I can see that this is 72 times 10. Well, 72 is 9 times 8, 9 is 3 times 3, 8 is 4 times 2, 4 is 2 times 2, 10 is 2 times 5. So we have a pair of 3's. Remember, we're looking for pairs since it's a square root. We have a pair of 2's, another pair of 2's, and then we have our loner 5, right? Don't forget about him. So now we got negative 12 plus or minus. Outside the root, we have our 3 times the 2 times the 2. Oops. So remember, 3 was the yellow, orange, and then red. And then we still have our root, and then the 5 underneath all over negative 16. So remember, you multiply the things that you take out of the root. So we have negative 12 plus or minus 3 times 2 is 6. 6 times 2 is 12. So plus or minus 12 root 5 over negative 16. Okay. Now, what you want to do now is you want to look for this term, and this term, and you want to see is there anything that's in common with all three of those. You're not looking at what's underneath the root, you're just looking at what's outside of the root. And I can see that 12, 12, and 16 all have a common factor of 4. So I'm going to divide each one by 4. So if we do 12 divided by 4, negative 12 divided by 4, that gives us negative 3, plus or minus 12 divided by 4, that gives us 3 root 5, all over negative 16 divided by 4 is negative 4. Now, the other thing that you need to see, on the bottom we have a negative. It's conventional to put negatives either out in front or up top. So what happens is that this negative will really turn into negative 3 plus or minus 3 root 5 all over 4. Oops, I dropped a negative. So we have this negative is that one, and this negative is that one. Okay. So if I distribute this negative, that's right here, this will be positive 3. If I distribute the negative here to the plus, it turns into a minus. If I distribute the negative to the minus, that turns into a plus 3 root 5 all over 4. So what happens is that because you have both answers here, you'll have, again, still both answers here because you have both signs, I should say. You have both positive and negative, and you're changing them to negative positive, right? So it's conventional to put the plus up top. So plus or minus 3 root 5 over 4. So that gives us that answer. Okay. Let's try one last one. So if I give you negative 4v plus 6v squared minus 18 equals negative 4v squared minus 3. Okay. So this is not set equal to 0, so the first thing I need to do is set it equal to 0. Okay. So I'm going to move everything to one side. So I'm going to choose to move the right side to the left side. So just because there's less terms. Plus 3 plus 3. So I have negative 4v, 6v squared plus 4v squared is 10v squared. Negative 18 plus 3 is negative 15 equals 0. Okay? But remember, we have ax squared plus bx plus c. So this is out of order, right? We would did v, then v squared, then negative 15. So I'm going to rewrite it so it's 10v squared minus 4v minus 15. So please make sure, you don't have to rewrite it, but if you're getting your a, b, and c values, make sure that your a comes from the v squared. So the 10 is the a, and the b comes from the v, which is the negative 4. And then the constant, or the one without a variable, is the c. Right? So then we know a, b, c, or here it'd be a, b, c. So we do x equals negative b, so negative negative 4 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so negative 4 squared, minus 4ac, so a is 10, c is negative 15, all over 2a. Again, I like to find what's underneath the root first. Make sure when you're plugging this in that you do your parentheses negative 4 squared minus 4 times 10 times negative 15. So I got 616. So negative 4 is a positive 4 plus or minus the square root of 616. 2 times 10 is 20. Well, I'm going to take the square root of 616 to see if it's a perfect square. I get 24.8, which means it's not a perfect square. So now I'm going to break down 616. So if you remember, one of the rules that I told you about is that if the last two numbers are divisible by 4, then the whole thing's divisible by 4. So I know 4 goes into 16, so that means that 4 goes into this whole thing. So if I do 616 divided by 4, I get 154. 154 is even, so I'm going to divide by 2, so that gives me 2 and 77. 77 is 7 and 11, so now I have all of my prime numbers. I need to break down my 4 a little bit more. So that gives us 2 and 2. So I have a pair of 2's, and then we've got all of these are loners. Right? So they can't come out of the radical. So then we have 4 plus or minus the 2 that comes out of the radical, and then root 2 times 7 times 11, all over 20. So if we do 2 times 7 times 11, that's really 154. So 4 plus or minus. So then I'm going to look, do these three things, the 4, 2, and 20, have anything in common? Well, they do. Each one of those is divisible by 2. So I'm going to divide by 2, divide by 2, divide by 2. So then 4 divided by 2 is 2. I keep the plus or minus. 2 divided by 2 is just 1. So this is 1 root 154, which I can just write as root 154. And then 20 divided by 2 gives us 10. So then this is my answer. Now remember that this represents two answers. This is 2 plus root 154 over 10 and 2 minus root 154 over 10. Okay? Now, these are the exact values of your x-intercept. If I wanted to get an approximation, I would put those in my calculator. So if you want the decimal approximation, you would put parenthesis 2 plus the square root of 154, close your parenthesis, divided by 10. So that gives us, this is at 1.44. If I do the same thing, but do 2 in parentheses, 2 minus root 154, close your parentheses, divided by 10, that gives us negative 1.04, right? So then we know our x-intercepts are at 1.44, so like there-ish, and negative 1.04, so about there, right? And that's how we get our approximation of them, but we normally in math, we like to get our exact values. So these are exact values. These are our decimal approximations.